I didn't think anything of it the first time the kitchen light turned on by itself. It was such a small thing, so easy to explain that I didn't even question it. I was 25, living alone in a small house just outside of Portland. It was the first place I had completely to myself, and I had only been there for about a month when it started. The house wasn't new, but it wasn't old enough to feel creepy either. Everything worked fine. No weird sounds, no strange neighbors, nothing that would make you feel uncomfortable living there alone. That's why I didn't hesitate to brush it off. The first night it happened, I had gone to bed around midnight. I remember checking the house before I did, locking the doors, turning off the lights, making sure everything was how I left it. It was part of my routine, something I did every night without thinking. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a noise, not from a dream, just that strange feeling you get sometimes when something isn't quite right. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what woke me. Then I noticed it, a faint glow coming from the hallway. My chest tightened slightly as I turned my head. The kitchen light was on. I stared at it for a few seconds, confused more than anything else. I was sure I had turned it off. I always did. But instead of thinking too much about it, I just got up, walked into the kitchen, and flipped the switch off. The room went dark immediately. Nothing else seemed out of place. No windows open. No signs of anything being wrong. I went back to bed and fell asleep again without much trouble. The next morning, I didn't even remember it until later in the day. And when I did, I laughed it off. You probably just forgot, I told myself. It happens. That explanation worked, for exactly one night. The second time I noticed it faster. I woke up again in the middle of the night the same way, suddenly without a clear reason. This time I didn't need to look down the hallway to know something was different. I could see the light reflecting faintly against the wall from where I lay in bed. The kitchen light was on again. My stomach tightened a little more this time. Not fear, not yet, just confusion. I got up more slowly, my movements quieter, like I didn't want to disturb anything, even though I didn't know why. I stepped into the hallway and looked toward the kitchen. The light was steady, normal, nothing flickering, nothing unusual, just on. I walked in and turned it off again. Before going back to bed, I checked the switch twice, making sure it was fully down, making sure there was no way it could just flip itself back on. That night, I didn't fall asleep as easily. My brain kept replaying it, trying to figure out if I had missed something, if I had made a mistake, but eventually I drifted off. The third night was when it started to feel wrong. I didn't wake up this time. I was already awake, lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, trying to fall asleep. It was quiet, completely quiet, the kind of silence that fills the entire house when there's nothing else around. Then, without warning, the kitchen light turned on. Not gradually, not flickering, just on. I saw it happen from the hallway. The glow appeared instantly, filling the space with light. My entire body went still. I hadn't moved. I hadn't gotten out of bed. I hadn't touched anything. And yet the light was on. I sat up slowly, my eyes fixed on the hallway, trying to process what I had just seen. My heart started to beat a little faster now. Not racing, just enough to make me aware of it. I got out of bed and walked toward the kitchen each step, careful, quiet. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. Everything looked normal. The counters were clear. The sink was empty. The back door was closed, locked, nothing out of place. I stepped inside and turned the light off again. This time I didn't leave right away. I stood there for a moment staring at the switch, waiting. Nothing happened. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and went back to my room. That's when I started locking my bedroom door at night. Not because I thought someone was in the house, just because it made me feel better. Like I had some control over whatever was happening. The next day I even checked the wiring, flipped the breaker on and off, tested the switches. Everything worked perfectly. No issues, no glitches, nothing that explained what I had seen. That night I went to bed earlier than usual. I told myself I was overthinking it, that there was a logical explanation I just hadn't figured out yet. Around 2 a.m. I woke up again. This time it wasn't the light that caught my attention first. It was a sound, soft, subtle, but unmistakable, a movement coming from the kitchen. My entire body went rigid instantly. I held my breath listening. The sound came again. A faint shift, like something being touched, something being moved. My eyes slowly turned toward the hallway. The kitchen light was on, and this time, I knew I hadn't turned it on. I sat there frozen, staring at the glow, listening to the silence that followed. And then I realized something that made my chest tighten. The sound I heard wasn't random. It was controlled, careful, like someone was trying not to make noise, and they were inside my kitchen. I didn't move, not at first. My entire body felt frozen in place as I stared at the faint glow spilling into the hallway, trying to convince myself I was wrong, that what I heard wasn't what I thought it was, that there wasn't someone in my kitchen. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, like something was there, waiting. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers shaking just enough to make it hard to grip. I kept my eyes fixed on the hallway as I unlocked it, the screen lighting up just enough to make me feel exposed. I didn't call anyone yet. I didn't even know what I would say. I just held it listening. Then I heard it again, a soft sound, the faint scrape of something against the counter. My stomach dropped instantly. That wasn't a pipe. That wasn't the house settling. That was someone touching something, someone moving carefully. My breathing became shallow, uneven. I forced myself to stay quiet, terrified that even the smallest sound would give me away. I slid off the bed slowly, my feet barely making contact with the floor, and moved toward the door. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, my hand hovering over the handle, trying to listen more clearly. The light was still on. The sound had stopped again, too suddenly. Too completely, like whoever was out there had paused, listening, the same way I was. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I realized then that I couldn't stay in my room. If someone was in the house, I needed to know where they were. I needed to know how close they were. I turned the handle slowly and opened the door just a few inches, enough to look out into the hallway. The light from the kitchen stretched across the floor, bright and steady. Everything else was dark. I stepped out carefully, my eyes scanning the space, my ears straining for any movement. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, just silence. But it didn't feel safe. It felt like something had just happened, like I had missed it by seconds. I moved toward the kitchen slowly, each step deliberate, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The closer I got, the stronger the feeling became. That heavy, suffocating awareness that I wasn't alone. I reached the doorway and stopped. The kitchen looked normal. At first, the light was on, just like before. The counters were clear, the sink was empty. But then I noticed something. A cabinet door, slightly open. My chest tightened instantly. I knew that cabinet. I used it every day. I always closed it, always. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on it. The door moved slightly as I approached, like it had just been touched, like it hadn't fully settled yet. My stomach twisted. I looked around the room quickly, scanning every corner, every shadow. Nothing, no one, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse, because now I knew something had changed. I reached out slowly and pushed the cabinet door closed. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. I flinched, my heart jumping, and then I heard it, a soft exhale, right behind me. My entire body locked up. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me not to. The air felt colder suddenly, like something had stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel it. Close enough that I knew if I turned around, I wouldn't be alone anymore. My grip on my phone tightened as I finally forced myself to move. I dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost hit the wrong number. The call connected, but I couldn't speak right away. My throat felt tight, like it had closed up completely. "There's someone in my house," I whispered finally. The dispatcher told me to stay calm, to get somewhere safe to leave if I could. But I couldn't move yet, not until I knew where he was. Not until I knew how close he was standing behind me. I forced myself to turn around. Slowly, carefully. The kitchen was empty, completely empty. My chest tightened painfully as I tried to process what had just happened. I had heard it. I had felt it. There was no way I imagined that. And then I realized something worse. The back door. I turned toward it immediately. It was closed, locked, exactly how I left it. The windows were closed too. No signs of forced entry, no way in, no way out. The dispatcher asked if I could leave the house. This time I didn't hesitate. I backed toward the front door, my eyes still scanning the room, waiting for something to move, waiting for him to step out from somewhere I hadn't checked. I opened the door and stepped outside into the cold night air, my entire body shaking now. The police arrived within minutes. They searched everything, every room, every cabinet, every space someone could hide. They found nothing, no one, no signs of a break-in, no explanation. But one of the officers noticed something I hadn't. The kitchen light switch. It was slightly loose, not broken, not faulty, just worn down, sensitive, easy to flip. "It could turn on by itself," he said. I nodded, trying to believe him, trying to accept that explanation, because it was the only one that made sense. But it didn't explain the cabinet, it didn't explain the sound, and it definitely didn't explain what I felt standing behind me. I stayed somewhere else that night, and the night after that, I didn't go back until a few days later during the day when everything felt normal again, safe again. But I never stayed there alone at night after that, and sometimes, when I think about it, I realize something that still doesn't sit right with me. The light turning on, maybe that was just a faulty switch, but the cabinet, the sound, the breathing behind me, those weren't random, those weren't accidents, those were choices. And if they were choices, that means someone was there, close enough to reach me, close enough to speak, close enough to breathe, and somehow, close enough to leave without being seen. I always made sure my windows were locked. It was one of those habits you don't really think about until something makes you realize how important it is. I lived alone in a small second-floor apartment, and even though the neighborhood was quiet, I never took chances. Every night before going to bed, I checked everything, the front door, the back door, and every single window. I knew exactly how each lock felt when it clicked into place. That's why the first time I heard the sound, it didn't make sense. It was around midnight. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to fall asleep. The apartment was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every little noise stand out. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound, light, irregular, coming from somewhere near the living room. At first I didn't react. I assumed it was something outside, maybe a branch, maybe something hitting the glass. It wasn't loud enough to worry me, but then it came again. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. My stomach tightened slightly. I set my phone down and listened. The sound didn't repeat immediately. For a few seconds, everything was silent again. I told myself it was nothing, just random noise. But the longer I lay there, the more aware I became of how quiet everything else was. I sat up slowly, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door, trying to decide whether to check or just ignore it. Then it happened again. This time louder, more deliberate, not random at all. My heart started to beat a little faster as I got out of bed and walked toward the living room. The floor creaked softly under my steps, the sound echoing in the silence. I reached the doorway and stopped listening. Nothing. The tapping had stopped. The room looked normal. The lights were off, the curtains drawn, everything exactly how I left it. I stepped inside slowly and looked toward the window. It was closed, locked, just like I knew it would be. I walked closer and checked it anyway, pressing lightly against the frame. It didn't move. The lock was secure. I let out a small breath, feeling a little ridiculous for even checking. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself. "Just something outside." I went back to bed, but I didn't fall asleep right away. My mind kept replaying the sound, trying to place it, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I drifted off. The next night it happened again, same time, same sound. This time I didn't wait. I got up immediately and went straight to the living room. The tapping stopped just before I got there, like it knew I was coming. That thought made me pause for a second, but I shook it off quickly. That was ridiculous. I checked the window again, still locked, still secure. I even pulled the curtain back slightly and looked outside. The street was empty, no one there, no movement, no explanation. That should have been enough to reassure me. It wasn't, because the sound had been too clear, too intentional. Over the next few nights, it became a pattern, always around the same time, always the same tapping, sometimes softer, sometimes louder, but always there, always stopping the moment I got close. I started checking the windows more often, not just at night, but during the day too, making sure everything was locked, making sure nothing had changed. One afternoon, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Smudges on the glass. Faint, but visible if you looked closely. At first I thought it was just dirt or fingerprints from cleaning, but the more I looked at them, the less they made sense. They weren't random. They were placed too evenly, too deliberately, like someone had been touching the window from the outside. My chest tightened as I leaned closer, trying to see them more clearly. The marks were at about chest height, spread slightly apart, like hands. I stepped back immediately, my heart starting to race. That didn't make sense. I lived on the second floor. There was no balcony, no easy way for someone to reach that window from the outside. I told myself there had to be an explanation, maybe from before I moved in, maybe from when the building was being worked on. That made sense. It had to. But that night, everything changed. I was already awake when it started, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Because now I knew it would happen. Around midnight, right on time, I heard it. The tapping, louder than before, closer, more aggressive. I didn't get up immediately this time. I just listened, counting the taps, waiting for the pause, and then something new. A sound I hadn't heard before, the faintest shift. Like the window frame moving. My entire body went rigid. I sat up slowly, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door. The tapping stopped. Silence filled the apartment. Then, quietly, I heard it. The sound of the window lock turning. From the outside. The sound of the lock turning didn't make sense. Not logically, not physically, not in any way I could explain. But I heard it, clear, close, real. My entire body went cold as I sat there in the dark, staring at the bedroom door, trying to process what was happening. Windows don't unlock themselves. And they definitely don't unlock from the outside on the second floor. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my phone without taking my eyes off the door, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. I didn't call anyone yet, I just listened. The tapping didn't start again. Instead, there was something worse. Silence. That heavy, suffocating kind of silence that makes you feel like something is about to happen. Then I heard it. A faint scrape, the sound of the window being pushed. Slowly, carefully. My chest tightened as I slid off the bed, my movements as quiet as possible. Every instinct in my body told me not to go toward it, not to check, not to confirm what I already knew. But I couldn't stay in the dark without knowing where he was. I stepped into the hallway, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, my eyes fixed on the living room. The light was off. The curtains were still drawn. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. The air felt different, colder, like something had entered that space. I moved forward slowly, each step deliberate, trying to avoid making noise. When I reached the edge of the living room, I stopped. The curtain by the window had shifted slightly, just enough to show a gap that hadn't been there before. My stomach dropped instantly. I knew I had closed it completely earlier. I always did. I forced myself to get closer, my heart racing faster with every step. The closer I got, the clearer it became. The window was open, not wide, just a few inches. Enough for someone to slip a hand through. Enough for someone to unlock it. I felt my breath catch in my throat. That shouldn't have been possible. There was no balcony, no ladder. Nothing outside that would allow someone to reach that high. But it was open, and the lock was turned. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. I just stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Then I noticed something else. The screen. It had been pushed inward, bent slightly. Not enough to break, but enough to create an opening. My stomach twisted violently. Someone had been trying to get in. Or worse, someone had already been in. A sudden noise behind me made me jump. A soft creak. From the hallway, my entire body locked up. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. The hallway was dark. Empty. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. I realized then that I had made a mistake. I had walked away from my bedroom, from the only space I could have locked myself in. I stepped back slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness, trying to see if anything moved. Nothing did. But that didn't make me feel better, because whoever had been at the window wasn't there anymore, which meant they were somewhere else, somewhere inside. I raised my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "Someone tried to get in," I whispered. "The window, it's open." The dispatcher told me to stay where I was, to not confront anyone, that officers were on the way. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. My eyes never stopped moving, checking every shadow, every corner, every doorway. And then, I heard it, breathing, not loud, not aggressive, just there, close, too close. My chest tightened painfully as I tried to figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't from the window, it wasn't from outside, it was inside the apartment. I turned my head slowly toward the hallway, and for a split second, I saw him, a shape, moving just beyond the edge of the light, then gone. My heart stopped. I didn't wait, I didn't think, I ran. Straight to the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock as panic took over completely. I threw it open and stumbled outside, the cold air hitting me like a shock. I didn't stop until I reached the bottom of the stairs. Only then did I turn back. My apartment door was still open. The hallway inside dark, empty, or at least it looked empty from where I stood. The police arrived minutes later. They searched everything. The apartment, the hallway, the outside of the building. They found the window open, the screen bent, but they didn't find him. No footprints, no signs of how he got up there, no explanation. But one of the officers did say something that stuck with me. If he could reach that window, he said, then he's been watching this place for a while. I didn't go back that night, or the next. I moved out within a week, but even now, there's one thing I can't stop thinking about. The tapping, the pattern, the way it always stopped the moment I got close, like he knew exactly where I was. Like he was watching me from the other side of the glass, waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to get used to it, waiting for me to stop being afraid. Because the night the window finally opened, it wasn't the first time he tried to get in. It was just the first time he succeeded. I knew something was wrong before I even unlocked the door. It wasn't obvious. Nothing dramatic. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no alarms going off. Just a feeling. That quiet, uncomfortable feeling that something wasn't right. I had just gotten home from work later than usual, a little after 11 p.m. The street was quiet, most of the houses already dark. I sat in my car for a moment longer than I needed to, staring at my front door, trying to figure out why I felt so uneasy. Everything looked normal. The porch light was on, the windows were dark, nothing out of place, and yet something felt different. I shook it off, grabbed my bag, and walked up to the door. I told myself I was just tired. That's what long days do. They make you paranoid for no reason. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it behind me with a soft click. The house was silent. Completely silent. Too silent. I stood there for a second listening. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I locked the door out of habit and dropped my keys on the table. That's when I noticed it. The smell. It was faint, but it didn't belong. Something slightly metallic. Slightly stale, not strong enough to identify, but strong enough to feel wrong. My chest tightened slightly as I walked further inside, trying to ignore it. I set my bag down on the couch and turned on the living room light. Everything looked normal. Nothing had been moved. Nothing was missing. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light there too. The counters were clean, the sink was empty, the back door was closed, locked. I checked it anyway, just to be sure. Still secure. I let out a breath, trying to calm myself down. "You're overthinking it," I whispered. "Everything's fine." But it didn't feel fine. The air felt heavier, like something was sitting just beneath the surface of the silence. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, trying to distract myself. That's when I noticed something else. The cabinet door. It was slightly open, not wide, just a few inches. I froze for a second, staring at it. I knew I had closed it before leaving. I always did. It was part of my routine. Everything had a place. Everything was put back exactly where it belonged. I reached out slowly and pushed it shut. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the quiet kitchen. I flinched slightly, my heart jumping, and then I heard it. A soft sound. Faint, almost unnoticeable. But in that silence, it stood out immediately. A shift, like something moving, somewhere deeper in the house. My entire body went rigid. I didn't move. I didn't breathe properly. I just listened. The sound didn't come again right away. For a few seconds, everything went still. Too still. Then, another sound. A step. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. My stomach dropped instantly. That wasn't the house settling. That wasn't a pipe. That was a person inside my house. I turned my head slowly toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. The light from the kitchen didn't reach all the way down. The end of the hall was dark, too dark. And for a split second, I thought I saw something move. Not clearly, just a shift in the darkness. Then nothing. Gone. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I took a step back instinctively, my eyes still fixed on the hallway. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response, just silence. I felt a wave of cold run through my body. If someone was in the house, they heard me. And if they didn't respond, that meant they weren't supposed to be there. I grabbed my phone from the counter, my hands shaking slightly now, and moved slowly toward the living room. I didn't want to turn my back on the hallway, but I also didn't want to stay there. Not that close. Another sound, this time louder, a creak from the floor. Closer now. I froze again, my breath caught in my chest. The sound of something shifting its weight, taking another step, coming toward me. I could feel it, that presence, moving through the house, not rushing, not panicking, just walking, like it knew exactly where I was, like it had been waiting for me to come home. My grip tightened on my phone as I slowly backed away, my eyes still locked on the darkness at the end of the hall. And then I saw it, a figure, just barely visible, standing in the shadows, still, watching, not moving, not speaking, just there. And in that moment, I realized something that made everything worse. The door hadn't been left unlocked. The cabinet hadn't been left open. The smell hadn't been random. Someone had been inside my house before I even got home, and they hadn't left. They were still there, waiting in the dark. I didn't move. I couldn't. My entire body felt locked in place as I stared into the darkness at the end of the hallway, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I thought I saw. But the longer I looked, the more real it became. The shape was still there, barely visible, blending into the shadows but unmistakable. A person, standing completely still, watching me. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my entire chest. I tightened my grip on my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to think of what to do. Run, stay, call for help. None of it felt like a good option, because no matter what I did, I wasn't alone in that house, and whoever was there had been there before me. I took a slow step backward, my eyes never leaving the hallway. The figure didn't move, not yet. That made it worse. If he had rushed me, if he had made a sound, I could have reacted. I could have done something, but this silence, this waiting, it felt controlled, intentional, like he was letting me panic, letting me realize exactly what was happening. I unlocked my phone as quietly as I could and dialed 911, pressing it tightly against my ear. "There's someone in my house," I whispered. My voice barely came out. The dispatcher asked me where I was, if I could see the person. "He's in the hallway," I said, my eyes still fixed on the shadow. The figure shifted slightly. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. He wasn't a shadow. He wasn't my imagination. He was real, and he was moving. Slowly, he took a step forward. The floor creaked under his weight, the sound echoing in the silence. My entire body went cold. I backed up another step, then another, my breathing shallow and uneven. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Officers are on the way." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. My eyes never left him. He stepped into the faint light spilling from the kitchen, and for the first time I saw him clearly. A man, tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. His face was blank, not angry, not rushed, just empty, like none of this meant anything to him. He stopped a few feet into the hallway, his head tilting slightly as he looked at me. The movement was slow, curious, like he was studying me. My chest tightened painfully. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move properly. All I could do was stare back. He took another step. Closer now. Close enough that I could hear his breathing. Slow, calm, completely controlled. That was the worst part. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He was comfortable, like he had been in that house for a while, like he knew it better than I did. "Don't move," he said quietly. My entire body froze instantly. The words were soft, almost gentle, but there was something behind them that made it clear it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. The dispatcher's voice faded into the background. I could barely hear her anymore. All I could hear was him, and my own heartbeat. I shook my head slightly, my instinct finally starting to push back against the fear. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't let him get closer. My grip tightened on my phone as I took a step backward toward the front door. His eyes followed me immediately. He noticed. Of course he did. He took another step forward, faster this time, not running, but no longer slow. Closing the distance, that was enough. Something in me snapped. Not courage, not strength, just instinct. I turned and ran, straight for the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, slipping once, twice before I finally got it open. I threw the door wide and stumbled outside the cold night air, hitting me like a shock. I didn't stop running until I reached the middle of the street. Only then did I turn back. The front door was still open. The hallway, inside dark, empty, or at least it looked empty from where I stood. My entire body was shaking now, adrenaline hitting all at once. I could barely hold my phone steady. "He's inside," I whispered. "He's still inside." The police arrived within minutes. Lights flooded the street. Officers rushed into the house, clearing it room by room. I stood outside, unable to move, watching as they went in, waiting, hoping, praying they would find him, that this wasn't just in my head, that I wasn't losing my mind. They searched everything, every room, every closet, every space, but they didn't find him. No sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no open doors, nothing. It was like he had disappeared, like he had never been there at all. But I knew he had been. I had seen him, heard him, felt him standing there. One of the officers walked back out and looked at me carefully. "Are you sure you saw someone?" he asked. I nodded immediately. "He was right there," I said. "In the hallway." The officer hesitated for a second, then nodded slowly. "We'll keep a report," he said, "but there's no sign anyone's been here." I didn't argue. I couldn't, because there was something else I hadn't told them yet. Something I noticed just before I ran. Something that didn't make sense. The back of the house, the direction he came from. There were no doors there, no windows big enough to enter, no place for someone to hide, which meant one thing. He hadn't come in after I got home. He had been there already, inside my house, waiting, and somehow he knew exactly when I would walk through that door.